Hey guys, welcome back to the show. In this episode, I'm going to go into the behind the scenes look onto how this podcast was created and just kind of go in, or rather, not how this podcast was created, but rather what goes into creating each episode, whether it be solos or even just interview episodes, what goes into the interview process, how I find these guests, how I choose these guests, the rejection is redirection BS, and then all of that stuff. I'm gonna go deeper into why I call it BS and all of that. But we're gonna talk about all of that, and then we're also gonna talk about advice for creators I might have and all of that. So let's begin. Thank you all for tuning in today, and yeah. So first of all, the first thing I'm gonna talk about is how do I come up with episode ideas. A lot of the times with episodes, you kind of have to just choose and pick what you want to do, right? With traditional media stuff, like whether it be movies, shows, and creating songs and things, right? However, with the podcast, specifically for me, I tend to choose the episodes based on what I'm experiencing. So let's say I'm experiencing burnout. I'll make a burnout episode around that time so that I can talk about it and then give advice based on what I've been doing to help or what's not working, and I talk about that. So a lot of it has to do with like the experiences I'm having. Now sometimes these experiences I've had are in the past, but they're also something I feel like are relevant to people listening, like you guys. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about creative expression. How can we express ourselves? And that's where that idea comes in. Now with episode ideas involving say like, I don't know, interviewing people, right? That is more so just reaching out and networking and trying to get these people on board to be part of like your episode. So kind of diving into now, how do you stay authentic to yourself and make sure the guests you're bringing on are not only relevant to the podcast, but also people that have similar values and ethics to you. It's important, right? So for me, what I do is, let's just say, for example, I'm trying to I interview the Broadway star, right? With the Broadway star, then you go into like, okay, well, this Broadway star, they're good. Go into the profiles, you research them, do all the things. Like, well, let's shoot a shot. A lot of the times with the guests I have, I wouldn't be able to talk to them or even have them on the podcast had I not shot my shot. With Kristen Hernandez specifically, I was like, I'm gonna give it a shot. I don't think anything's gonna happen just because she's so well known for like her performances on Six the Musical on Broadway. I was like, well, there's no way this is gonna work, but it did work. And so I think the number one thing is to remember is whatever you do, don't count yourself out before you even begin. And make sure that you're like kind of ingraining in like putting it in all the work you can from your side and then leaving the rest up to whatever fate has decided for you. And I think that's something that I've also learned over the years is that it, the moment you stop yourself from chasing the dream or chasing the person you're going after, whether it be in relationships or for podcasts or business or whatever, unless you network and talk to the person or, figure out what it is that you want, you won't be able to get it, right? Because if you're not shooting your shot, if you're not doing the things that you need to do in order to achieve that big thing, you're essentially canceling out the potential you may be, you know, unleashing if you were to, go forward with what you were planning on doing. So if I were not to shoot my shot, I would have, it would be an automatic no because I didn't put myself out there and be like, okay, well, let's do this. So that's one big thing. And kind of going into deeper, how do I find these guests and how I choose these guests? For me, if I'm experienced, like if I'm watching a movie that's based on a real person, I search them up. So for example, with trying to remember his Marty Burlsworth, right? His brother had the horrific accident, right? And I was like, well, his story just needs to be told because he was such an influential figure in the sports industry. I was like, well, story needs to be told, whether it be through his brother or his family or whoever. And so I reached out and, talked about their foundation. We talked about like sports and we talked about the trophies and competitions that he has been part of and, continued his legacy through that manner. So that's one avenue. And then other avenue is social media, Spotify, Instagram, all these things. So if I'm just gonna continue with the Kristen Hernandez example, like with Kristen Hernandez, like okay, well, Kristen Hernandez, awesome, had a great interview. She was amazing. let's see who else we can find in the same vein, right? So you go to a follower list and see who does she follow, and then go from there and be like, okay, well, she follows um other profit stars, so she follows other creators. And so then you're like, okay, well, let's note these things down and research them and see if they're a good fit for us. Now again, just because they have 1 million followers or just because they have 100 followers, again, don't count yourself out. Do not be like, oh, well, this person's 1 million followers, this person 100 followers, they're not big enough or they're too small for me. Because you person behind the account is the one that matters, not socials and what the followers are and all. It does help if they do have followers that are higher than yours or lower than yours or whatever. But at the end of the day, you're talking to the person and not the follower count, right? The follower count could be super high, but in the end, it's the connection that you build with the people. For me, like, I've had so many conversations with people who have had way more followers than me. Sometimes they repost, they don't. It's in the end, it's the conversation that we have that really captures my attention as like, wow, I would not have heard of this thing had I not reached out, had I not, like, put myself out there and done the things. So when I'm choosing guests though, like it's a lot about like choosing and picking, making sure you're making the right decision. Oftentimes you might say no to the wrong person, or you may say yes to the wrong person. You may say yes to the right person, but at the wrong time. So then the interview is rushed and it's just not as good as you want it to be, right? And so a lot of it is just picking and choosing, yes, but then it's also who do you kind of want to be known to be interviewed for? Like, with my dream guests, it's been always like Liv Rodrigo, Adele, Billie Eilish, and all these amazing figures in the media industry and music industry. But then it's also like, well, you put your shot out there, you gotta know several times. Are you gonna keep going for them? Are you gonna shift gears and go into a different avenue? And for me, I usually shift gears, but sometimes you just gotta keep trying. They kept trying, trying, trying. And I mean, I was getting replies, right? So that was a good thing. But there's this thing of people saying rejection is redirection, right? And I sort of believe it, but not really, because it is redirection, yes, but it takes you in a different avenue. Sometimes the path is great, sometimes it's not. But I don't think that's really what rejection is. I think rejection is just simply a plain no, which is a no, not yet. Like it's like a no for now, but try again later, and you keep trying, and that's the perseverance that goes behind the process that you would call the avenue of putting yourself out there. A lot of this episode, I'm going to be talking about putting yourself out there and trying new things and going out of your comfort zone because that's really what the podcast is all about. It's the only way you can really connect with these new people. Because now coming up with interview questions, a lot of it is research. The research behind is like really intensive. It takes me 3 to 4 hours, um, at the minimum, to research these people and like figure out, okay, well, what am I gonna ask them? Because I want to make sure questions that I ask are deep enough and introspective enough that will make them think, but it's also not so odd and like bizarre that they have no clue what I'm asking. And then also, of course, for the listeners, for you guys, I have to make sure that, what I'm asking is something that might be beneficial. It's not just like, oh, how's your career? What have you been doing? And then going deeper into the advice portion, like how does burnout work for you? How does your creative expression work for you? How does your schedule look like as a creative? All those things that you can understand and learn and be like, okay, well, I'm doing this thing and this person's doing that. Let's see how we can implement their good habits into my life, that type of thing. And then obviously with the sensitivity factor and being true to yourself, a lot of it also has to do with making sure that the people you have on are like, of course, having a good profile, have no controversies behind them. Sometimes controversies that are behind them are not like political controversies. They're more so like, oh, they said this one thing that sound like this, but it's actually this, and it's nothing revolving around politics, right? That's okay. Like I've had a couple controversial guests on here who have done things, but it was more so in like non, I guess, good way to put it would be non, like reputation harming. Like they were generally good people that made an honest mistake. And so those kind of things are fine, like, and for me, usually in my interviews, if I bring on a controversial person, I usually try to tone it down, make sure I don't address controversy directly, be indirect about it, and you know, ask questions that they're comfortable answering, but also ask hard-hitting questions that will make them think and go beyond what they would usually answer in interviews, right? Um, let's see, what else? Um, Another thing is like, with promotions, right? When you promote the episode, it really helps when the guest usually like, repost the content and it's like, oh, look, I got interviewed on this podcast, no matter how small the podcast or how big it is, right? It helps because it's exposure, lets people know who you are. You can continue to broaden your network and connections. Of course, it's quite frustrating when people don't do that because again, they're not obligated to, but it really does help. And of course, it is a terrible feeling because it's like, well, you worked so hard and you deserve the recognition, I guess. But again, it's not warranted. You're not, you may think that you deserve it, but at the same time, it's the person's account, right? So they have the choice of whether they want to repost the episode or not. I personally, if I were in their position, I would just because, like, if you're on a podcast, it's exposure for you too, even if you have a larger presence or something bigger than the media outlet you're presenting for. But regardless, it's all good. This is part of the process of media industry, right? The media industry will break you, will kind of test you and be like, well, this is kind of what we're doing today, but then it shifts gears and does something completely different. But again, now my highest problem though is not like that's like my least of my issues, right? My biggest one is silent supporters or the ones silent supporters of great, like they're fine, right? But the ones who are like silent viewers, like the ones who basically are lurking on your profile and looking at everything, right? And these people are like close to you and like they're looking at everything. They're, looking at your stories and of your episodes or whatever it is you're doing, but they don't interact with it. They don't talk about it. It might be the best thing for you. It might be the best thing that you've ever done. Posting about expecting that, someone will say something, but the people you're close to don't say anything. It's just like looking at it and nothing happens. That is frustrating because then the expectations are what kind of are like, well, expected this person to do something, but they didn't. Now what do we do next? And so that's where my next thing comes in is with the podcast, specifically the behind the scenes process of like the whole expectation portion. It's what kind of comes back in the end being this big, huge problem because when you have expectations, you expect those things to happen because you've set the bar super, super high. And again, these people are not obligated to interact with, they're not obligated to say something. But again, when you're super close to someone, you have to be like, well, I thought, well, I do that. And I support people. Even if I'm not that close, if I love something a lot, I'll be like, well, this is awesome. You should be on doing bigger things with this. This is awesome. And you should expand your horizons, do this thing. But again, you can't expect you from others. And I know that sounds a bit like almost like I'm saying I'm better than everybody else, which is not what I'm saying. It's just that you can't expect what you do from others because they're their own person, you're your own person, and everything that you do is going to be different from others because they have separate paths, separate thinking, separate mind that goes into the things. And so that's where, you have to kind of think and be like, well, is it worth expecting this from someone? Obviously, it's better to not have any expectations, but hard in the beginning trying to understand how to avoid that avenue. Now, lastly, obviously, this episode is going to sound shady to some listening because the whole silent supporter and silent viewer thing is oddly specific. But this is just a general experience, and I'm just talking about the behind the scenes of how I feel and stuff. I mean, obviously, if you feel like this episode is pointing at you, well, maybe it is, who knows? But just kind of digressing and going back to what we are talking about, this episode is very much into like the behind the scenes of what I do and how this all works. A lot of people obviously discount the pressures of like making sure people watch and making sure people listen, making sure people share, making sure people rate. And all of it is like, well, it's out of control because you don't know what's happening beyond what you post, right? You may see, okay, well, these many people are listening. But again, people listening, you don't know if they're listening to the whole thing, or if they're cutting in. back and forth, but I trust you guys and I know that, well, whatever I post, you guys listen and you enjoy it, hopefully. And yeah. And then also again that going deeper into the whole guest situation, like with, you know, being on the lookout, hearing names, and if let's say I am, interact with a new person, and make sure to ask their name so I can like, hop onto the LinkedIn and be like, oh, this person looks interesting. And I know that does seem like, well, does that just mean that you're meeting everyone for the sake of like broadening your own profile? Not necessarily, but it's also like, well, if they are amazing, it's a bonus because it's like they get their voices heard and you get, to interview them and hear the perspective and learn from them and also share that with you guys. So that's that. And then obviously it is tiring because then it's like you're doing like finding people from Spotify, Instagram, and all that. But again, it's worth it because in the end, the people you meet, connections you make are people you would not usually meet on the usual circumstance as a 17-year-old girl, right? Or even just a 17-year-old general. Like you would not be talking to Broadway stars for 30 under 30 honorees and things if you were not doing something like a podcast or being part of a media outlet or going to conferences and things, right? So that's the biggest thing. So I'm extremely grateful for that. So, lastly, my advice for creator is like, as I said earlier, don't count yourself out. Keep trying, don't give up. You will get no's, you will get yeses, you'll get maybes, you will get no responses, and it's all part of the process. If you stop just because you're not getting the outcome you want, it's really not gonna work in your favor because the moment you give up, it's like, well, the universe is not gonna help you anymore. It's not gonna try to get you what you want or what you need because you're not putting in the insert key that says, okay, I'm inserting my key in this, let's see what works. Right? You need to try everything. You need to make sure you put in the effort from your side and then leave the rest to the universe and fate. Figure out what's next for you. And then my second advice would be again, just be authentic. Do not try to drive yourself crazy and nuts by, acting like someone else to get that promotion or get that big client to be part of your business or whatever. And yeah, just make sure you're curious and hustling, but not in a negative way, of course. And working hard, chasing your dreams, being ambitious and curious and embracing your inner critique and learning from your past mistakes and kind of influencing yourself and others through the good that you do. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this episode. I hope you all got some insight of like, what my behind the scene looks like, what my thought processes are, and what my thoughts on rejection is, redirection, all of that means to me, and about how to find guests and this and that. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you all next week. Have a great day and keep hustling.